change the image and the direction of this family without openly repudiating this father he loved. He had to be both loyal to his father and loyal to his principles at the same time, even though his principles often differed from those of his father.
In 1910, John D. Rockefeller Jr. decided to retire from the Standard Oil Trust and devote himself exclusively to helping his father give away the family fortune. With Jr. at his side, Sr. launched the Rockefeller Foundation, endowed with $100 million. Its ambitious goal was to promote the well-being of mankind throughout the world.
Other people may have had trouble reconciling Sr. as the greatest philanthropist of his age. I think what's important to note is that Sr. never had a moment's worry. The notion that he gave away hundreds of millions of dollars to assuage guilt is nonsense. The notion that Jr. became a great philanthropist because of worry and guilt, not so easy to call. Jr. was a man plagued by self-doubt.
On May 15, 1911, the Supreme Court of the United States declared that Standard Oil was a monopoly in restraint of trade and should be dissolved. Rockefeller heard of the decision while golfing at Kykuit with a priest from the local Catholic Church, Father J.P. Lennon.
And Rockefeller reacted with amazing aplomb. He turned to the Catholic priest and said, "Father Lennon, have you some money?" And the priest was very startled by the question and said, "No." And then he said, "Why?" And Rockefeller replied, "Buy Standard Oil."
As Rockefeller foresaw, the individual Standard Oil companies were worth more than the single corporation. In the next few years, their shares doubled and tripled in value. By the time the reign of cash was over, Rockefeller had the greatest personal fortune in history, nearly 2% of the American economy.
And it was really losing the antitrust case that converted John D. Rockefeller into history's first billionaire. So that Standard Oil was punished in the federal antitrust case, but John D. Rockefeller Sr. most assuredly was not.
Rockefeller's lucky streak was not over yet. Just as the electric light bulb threatened to wipe out the need for kerosene, the automobile appeared. The market for gasoline sparked euphoria in the oil industry. Rockefeller's soaring fortunes made it seem as if he had outwitted his critics again. Increasingly genial and relaxed, he cast off his business suit and experimented with a variety of wigs. He delighted in the birth of Junior's second son, Nelson, born on Senior's birthday. 3 more boys followed: Lawrence, Winthrop, and David. With the furor over Standard Oil subsiding and the philanthropies launched, Junior was determined to give his children an inheritance they could be proud of. But his hopes of redeeming the family name were about to be shattered. In the fall of 1913, beneath the majestic peaks of the Rockies, a labor dispute was engulfing the coal mines of southern Colorado. It would engulf the Rockefellers as well, making the family once again the target of national outrage. The explosion came on September 23rd in the foothills near Ludlow. 8,000 miners struck a Rockefeller-owned company, Colorado Fuel and Iron, demanding more humane living and working conditions. CF&I immediately evicted the strikers from their homes. Families were forced to move into a makeshift tent colony beyond company grounds. The striking miners came from 32 different countries. Some thought John D. Rockefeller was the President of the United States. As both sides braced for a showdown, CF and I brought in gunmen and had them deputized by county sheriffs. Union organizers descended upon Colorado, including the fiery Mother Jones, who led a protest on the state's capital. In December, 4 feet of snow fell on southern Colorado. 20,000 men, women, and children shivered on the windswept plain. With no end to the stalemate in sight, John D. Rockefeller Jr. was summoned to testify before Congress. Although he was a company director, he said he knew little of the situation and had put his faith in the managers on the scene. Then he declared his faith in the open shop, the right not to join a union. An approving senior rewarded his son with 10,000 shares of CF&I stock.
Senior was no friend of labor unions, and Junior goes along without really thinking about it, without realizing that it is damaging the men who were working for him, without thinking about what it's doing to those communities, and without realizing what it can do to him.
On the morning of April 20th, 2 weeks after Junior's testimony, a company of 35 National Guardsmen stationed themselves on a hill overlooking the tent colony in Ludlow. When a shot rang out from an unknown location, the Guardsmen began raking the camp with machine gun fire, and a pitched battle began. Trapped families sought shelter from the bullets in dirt bunkers hidden beneath the tents. The cries of frightened children pierced the din of battle. At dusk, when the southbound local rumbled into Ludlow, families who had been trapped in terror seized the opportunity to escape behind the barrier of 36 freight cars. As the train pulled away, the brakeman reported seeing the tent colony engulfed by flames, lit, he claimed, by the torch of a soldier. The extent of the tragedy came to light the next morning. In a bunker beneath one of the tents, the bodies of 2 women and 11 children were discovered. The New York Times reported they had suffocated like trapped rats, more terrified by the bullets which whistled above their heads than the flames. Accounts differed, but the massacre had claimed at least 24 lives. Scores more were injured and burned. To many, there was no doubt who bore responsibility. For the first time, the full weight of public opinion descended directly upon Junior's shoulders.
Here was John D. Rockefeller Jr., who was earnestly trying to redeem the family name, who was trying to distance himself from the family's corporate past and all these unscrupulous actions that his father had been accused of. And suddenly he's being accused of something far worse than anything that his father had been accused of, which was complicity in the deaths of Ludlow.
Angry pickets marched in front of Junior's home and his office at 26 Broadway. Speakers urged mobs to shoot him down like a dog. Novelist Upton Sinclair publicly indicted Junior with the charge of murder. Radical workers threatened to storm the locked gates of Kykuit. This especially rattled Junior, whose mother, Laura, lay inside the walls close to death. Then, a homemade bomb exploded in a tenement, killing 4 radicals. It was believed to be destined for Junior's townhouse. But by December 1914, the miners' relief funds were exhausted. They were forced to return to work. It appeared to many as if management had won, but not to John D. Rockefeller, Jr.
John D. Jr. saw I could have the blood of these people on me and my children for a generation. And to his credit, he eventually saw that he had to take a hand not only in cooling out that situation in Colorado and making it right, but that he had a duty in some sense to regularize this unruly, turbulent field of worker relations in America.
One of the first signs of Junior's transformation came when he was summoned to testify before a government commission investigating the strike. On his way in, he stopped to shake hands with Mother Jones. "I have never believed that you knew what those hirelings out there were doing," Mother Jones told him. On the stand, John did something his father never would have done: publicly admit that he had been wrong. The young Rockefeller then promised to go to Ludlow himself and speak directly with the miners. As he was about to make his journey of atonement, his mother died. One of the first sympathy notes came from Mother Jones. In September 1915, Junior arrived in Ludlow. He refused to carry a weapon or have bodyguards.
He sees the way in which miners lived. He sees how thin their children are. He understands that there is no potable drinking water in most of the camps. He, in fact, for someone with a reputation for immense rectitude and shyness, comes out of himself.
Preaching a gospel of cooperation and Christian brotherhood, Junior laid out a plan for a panel to address worker grievances. He also promised the miners they would not be fired if they chose to join a union instead. His approach worked. The miners voted for his plan in a secret ballot. The usually straight-laced Junior took the hand of a miner's wife and gaily broke into a dance when a 4-piece band struck up the Hesitation Waltz.
John's rearing as this child who had to eat plain food and wear plain clothes and be a plain little kid, he knew how to conduct himself with miners and families who were living in tents and who were living in great deprivation. He ate the food they had. He sopped up the gravy with his bread. It's a wonderful portrait of a man who, as it turned out, you kind of see Laura Spelman over his shoulder, realizing that she brought good to this boy as well as repression.
Darling, Senior as the greatest philanthropist of his age. I think what's important to note is that Senior never had a moment's worry. The notion that he gave away hundreds of millions of dollars to assuage guilt is nonsense. The notion that Junior became a great philanthropist because of worry and guilt, not so easy to call. Junior was a man plagued by self-doubt.
On May 15, 1911, the Supreme Court of the United States declared that Standard Oil was a monopoly in restraint of trade and should be dissolved. Rockefeller heard of the decision while golfing at Kykuit with a priest from the local Catholic Church, Father J.P. Lennon.
And Rockefeller reacted with amazing aplomb. He turned to the Catholic priest and said, "Father Lennon, have you some money?" And the priest was very startled by the question and said, "No." And then he said, "Why?" And Rockefeller replied, "Buy Standard Oil."
As Rockefeller foresaw, the individual Standard Oil companies were worth more than the single corporation, exclusively to helping his father give away the family fortune. With Junior at his side, Senior launched the Rockefeller Foundation, endowed with $100 million. Its ambitious goal was to promote the well-being of mankind throughout the world.
Other people may have had trouble reconciling.
Changing the image and the direction of this family without openly repudiating this father he loved. He had to be both loyal to his father and loyal to his principles at the same time, even though his principles often differed from those of his father.
In 1910, John D. Rockefeller Jr. decided to retire from the Standard Oil Trust and devote himself exclusively